Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about 5 different things that are important when you're making a horror game. And I wanted to go over this because it's the Halloween season. No, not everyone celebrates it, but it's good thematics. Anyway, so the first one is number 5. Going in and knowing what type of horror game you're making at the beginning is extremely important to keeping yourself focused and straightforward on your development. Because if you're wanting to make an action based horror game, you need to think of the mechanics and everything that go along with it from the beginning. Get those really, really zoned in before you go in and really get the baseline full design of your levels in. Because if you don't have a somewhat idea of what you're going to do, your levels are going to fall apart or they're just not going to be as good as they could have been if you have the ideas and at least a baseline implementation early on. Because if you can have those set up and good, then going in and testing and making sure that the flow and everything is working properly is going to be far easier. I've noticed a lot of indie games do this, as they'll make a horror game and they'll either just throw in different mechanics from other games just because they're simple to do, but not have anything that really makes that game unique. So I wanted to kind of talk about that, as once you've got it locked in on what kind of game you're making, it's fine if you reuse other people's ideas for mechanics, but it's not okay to only have reused mechanics from other games. So having that stuff, and not to mention that having that stuff in mind will really smooth out the development of your project. Because if you've got a whole like 2 hour or 5 hour game or even repeatable game that you're wanting to make, having the simple ideas in mind can really streamline the process of making it. Take Phasmophobia, for example. You have Phasmophobia, you've got Ghost Watchers, you've got freaking there's like several of the games that are like it. I've played 2 or 3 of them at least, and there is some uniquenesses to them. The only problem is I know a lot of people's issue with Phasmophobia is that once you've started playing, if the ghost hunts you, a lot of the time you just can't do anything. Even if you hide, the ghost will just run in there and kill you anyway, even if it hasn't seen you. I wanted to talk about that because if you've got something like that in mind, it's important to take things like how Ghostwatcher does it. For example, they actually have the ability to where you have certain items that can affect the ghost. You still have to figure out what kind of ghost it is, but then you have the slight ability to fight back using the lore of that individual ghost. But the idea of getting that intel is all linked to the same repeat mechanics, but because it's all fit into that kind of game, those mechanics make sense, so repeating those mechanics to an extent works just fine. The way they do the UV is different. You actually have a thing that you have to look through to be able to see the UV or the goo, and you collect the data that way. If you don't see it through the little monocle or whatever it is, it's been a while since I played Ghost Watchers, then you can't actually see the bit of that detail. But all of them have to use the same EMF for the individual games. So the next one would be number 4. I wanted to talk about looking at a game's timing and its flow, as in controlling the suspense that a game has. So, if you're making an action game, you don't have to worry about having that suspense that a much slower paced game would require. Like, don't get me wrong, it's important to think about the kind of suspense that you're doing, as it's not all about just like setting a little seed and having it kind of fester in the back of their mind and come up later. That's all dependent on the type of game you're making. If you're making an action based game, having those long gaps aren't always the best. Silent Hill does an interesting job of this, as there is a fair bit of combat, but there's also moments to breathe and take a look around and really figure out what's going on. And once you kill enemies, they don't usually revive. So there are, and when you're making a game like that where it's action based, has story, it's more of the feel of what's going on in the world, the grittiness of the combat, the small amount of items, the resource management that you have of that going on all together to build this congruent situation of it going across and really playing it to its favor. But that doesn't work in something like Amnesia, where it's all about avoiding the conflicts, making sure your lantern stays full, keeping an eye on your sanity, being smart about every move you make. It's not about just going and fighting the creature and getting past it. It's thinking about what paths you're going to take, how you avoid said creature that you've come across, how much fuel you have in your lantern, and so on and so forth. In other games like Call of Cthulhu, it's paying attention to the kind of dialogue choices you're making. Same thing with the Telltale series for The Walking Dead. It's heart pounding action at times, but it's also really intense moments that matter on every decision you make the next. So really it's important to keep in mind that flow is not just level based. It's also mechanics based and how you deliver situations. If you have a whole level built, cool, but if you don't have anything going on in that level, or when you're having dialogue going and it kind of just goes to a standstill, that's kind of why games have the moment where you go to talk to somebody and they repeat the dialogue over and over. It tells you, okay, the dialogue with them is over. Or it just goes away and you can't talk to them anymore. But there's a lot of games that seem to misunderstand or overlook it. There's been 2 or 3 indie games I've played, actually like 6 or 7 that I've played, that when you talk to a person and then you go to talk to them again, it restarts the whole conversation and it kind of breaks your immersion when they do that. Unless they give a fun little quip. But flow is really important because it can make or break the feel of a game. If you're making a game that's really suspenseful like Amnesia, and then the level design doesn't fit the gameplay, the action, and then areas just feel rushed while others feel real slow, it can cause many different issues with how the game comes out and how players can perceive that. Because the same level design and atmosphere, feel, all of that it works for Outlast does not work for Amnesia. Now they have somewhat similar of like dark, gritty, some bloody levels on them, but the exact feels don't match because the gameplay is just different enough. But they use very similar mechanics, like the lantern needs oil. Same thing with Call of Cthulhu, and then the camera needs batteries. But we'll come back to that later on. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about how it's really important with horror games. I mean, it's important with every game, but with horror games, if you don't control how fast a situation goes, and you give somebody a puzzle and nothing's going on between the 2 puzzles, it's going to get really boring, and that's not good flow or suspense. So I really wanted to talk about that as it can really make or break a game. The next one is number 3, sound design. So sound design in every game is important. In some games it's a bit more important, but every game should keep in mind that at least a base sound design is really, really important. So to break down that, I've actually made my own little system setup. Okay. And that's this little video right here. So if you take a look at this, I got a couple of audio clips and a whole bunch of tomfoolery going on here. So let me set this aside and we'll go full screen. And we'll go ahead and play this real quick. So yeah, that's the end of it. Let me go ahead and turn up the volume a bit more so we can hear a bit better. So it starts up, you hear the forest and the car approaching. And it comes over and you see the gate and you hear it. So it looks alright. I wasn't going for some incredible looking scene. I was just going for something to show off to be able to make my point with audio. So to make all of this work together, it takes multiple different audios. So if we take a look, I have the loop for the van, the sound of it just sitting there active, idled. The car on the gravel is the car approaching. You hear it come up close. Then you have the gate and both of them opening in order to sell that it's actually opening. Then we have the background audio for the forest, the wind, the trees. Then we've also got the birds in the background as well, right here, the bird harmony. All of that together is being used to really sell the scene, give you the feel of it. So let me go ahead and mute just a few of these and we'll see how much worse this gets just off of that. So if I turn off the motor right here, if I turn off the car on gravel, those two alone should really make this worse. And then we'll do it one more with the removal of the birds. There. Now it's just the motor and the gate. And of course the wind. You'll see the big difference in how the whole thing feels. Like, it still works, but it puts in a whole different feel for it. So if I now turn off the background mountain wind, you'll see that the whole thing just feels odd. And I'm also going to switch the gate audio I use because I have two different audios just for this purpose of showing it off. Alright, so let's try that again. So just that idea of the audio changing can make a whole area feel different. So if I was to take all this and hide the motor loop and have the car come up and not sit idle, you'll hear it. The car comes up and then it just turns off instead of looping there. We'll turn the birds back on so we can get a fresh understanding of how much difference they meant. And I'll turn up the volume a bit more. As we can see, this all sets up for the entrance of the characters and everything. But then there's different things you can subtly do for horror to really sell things, and that's slowing down audio, making things sound far less inviting. That would be like lowering the pitch of the car on the gravel coming up. Let's change that to 76 and listen to the car. So it didn't change an incredible amount, but it did make it a bit deeper. And then the birds, if I was to take the birds audio and slow it down, it would somewhat distort it and make it feel far less inviting. It's a very common thing that horror games, movies all do. So let's take a look at these and see exactly what I did in order to kind of do something like this. It's a lot of work, but it's pretty simple. So I took the volume of the motor set here and I lowered it from 0 and I slowly turned it on so it sounded like it was getting closer. And then I also had the car on the gravel do the exact same thing. I didn't have the length of it in order to fit the whole thing. So I just had it start at 0 and slowly turn on so it sounded like it was getting closer even if it wasn't. So there's things like that you can do in your little cutscenes for your horror game to kind of sell it. But then it took the layers of the motor loop on top of the car on the gravel and it tying together when they activate and they idle onto each other in order to really sell the area. And then the forest background just doesn't sound right without something there. It's too quiet if we listen. Oh, it's turned off down here too. Oops. You hear it in the background, but it's not enough. So I added in these birds to kind of sell it together. Now if we play them both together, you can hear the subtle wind. And together they kind of set this area together. You turn the birds a bit more. And it makes an area feel a lot more alive. So the reason that this stuff is important is you'll think of games like Five Nights at Freddy's, the jump scare audio playing together, or the famous Freddy's little song that he mimics, or the dum 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 dum. I think that's Bonnie that does that. Stuff like that. It becomes memorable and it gets the player sitting there like, okay, something's about to happen, something's going on. Or when you're in Slender Man, when you see him and it starts making the VHS kind of disruption noise, it lets the player know that something's going on. Or the even games that aren't horror games use things that will really catch people's attention and it gets their adrenaline going. They use these simple effects to do it. And one of the most famous ones I can think of at the moment, right off the top of my head, would be the Sonic drowning sound. In the original Sonic game, when you started to drown and it started doing the countdown and the music changed, so many people's adrenaline would just suddenly skyrocket. And that's the thing that a lot of horror games play on, or at least need to play on in order to catch the player's attention and get their adrenaline running. As that heavy, intense chase music that's going on when it's playing is very important to really get that adrenaline flowing when a chase is going. So yeah, then there's also the subtlety of things like strangers. When you have the character standing there in the background just watching the people while nothing is going on. but it's just silence, and they're just watching the dude, and they have no idea that they're in there in the house, and he's just going about his day. So there's a lot of stuff that can be used in perpetuity in order to get stuff working and looking fantastic, sounding amazing, and really just selling all that, because a subtle sound design that is just fitting right, like the aliens, the giant robot mechs from War of the Worlds, when they let out their heavy horn noises. It's just something that clicks together and really sells a project when you have audio that's working together like that. So yeah, sound design is extremely, extremely important in every game. Just, it's more so important in horror games. Number 2 is really selling your atmosphere. So, of course, atmosphere is important in every game. But there are many horror games I've seen that will have one setup of horror, and then like, as it's going through, it kind of loses its idea of what its atmosphere and horror is going to be. Which, if you have a story reason for that change, works really well. But there's a lot of horror games that will kind of just switch, and it no longer feels like it's the same game. So it's kind of a weird situation going on. Like when you're playing there, and it's action, and then the next area you get to, it's running away, and you can't do anything. It's kind of a weird twist on things that messes up the feel of the project or a game. And then it goes back to being able to fight. It's one of those things of where it teaches the player all these different things that they can do, and then it kind of punishes them for getting used to it, which, if done right, can work really well, but there's a lot of cases where it's not done properly because the atmosphere, the storytelling, and everything aren't designed to fit like that. So if you're going to do something like that, make sure to prep it ahead of time in the stages that we talked about before with your flow and setting up everything together. Because if you don't have that set up ahead of time, when you get to it, it can feel disjointed or completely disconnected, or just feel like it doesn't fit in your game at all. So yeah, atmosphere down to how bright your project is. There's a lot of horror games that are notably annoying at how overly dark they are. And that's why a lot of games actually implemented that whole thing where you can move the brightness select left and right. As there were so many horror games that just were unplayable for a lot of people because it was too dark and they weren't willing to run around in pitch black to find something with a small light. So yeah, that's also why there's that small point light that tends to sit on characters so it lights up like right in front of them. Because back when games didn't do that, it became more of a hassle and really gave horror games a bad name on stuff like that. So yeah, keeping track of your atmosphere, making sure it fits in your world. It doesn't matter if it's super realistic. Now, having realism can ground the project and make it more immersive to an extent. But as long as the world fits, the atmosphere fits the game and the world that you've built, the project that you're going for, then it all will click together. So it doesn't have to be super realistic. It just has to be realistic for that world you're building. That's the big thing that will separate immersion from game breaking and losing your immersion from a project, is whether or not it's believable in the world the character's playing inside of. So yeah, the next and final one would be the lighting and the gameplay. So lighting in horror is extremely important. As you'll see even in this, I kept the scene dark, but I wanted to emphasize a few different things. If you'll take a look, you'll see the light is dim right off the bat, which is fine. And then when you hit play, you see the light come in from off screen as the van pulls up. And now I've got a good light on top of the gate and everything. So I have a clear view of where the light is coming from, what it's covering, and I can see the whole scene. And as it zooms out, I can actually start seeing more of the level. As it progresses, I can see everything that's going on, and it's emphasizing the doors opening. And if I wanted to continue it, I could have the van go up and pull up to the house that it's heading up to. Or I could even have the character right here get out and go over and open the gate and have the audio play then. There's a lot of different things I can do, but it's important to keep in mind that your lighting and gameplay don't necessarily have to be separate. Like I said before, the flashlights, the lantern oils, the camera battery, all of those are used for important reasons because they are very effective tools. A character can, or a player can get very anxious because light means safety in most projects, most games. And even in real life, people feel more safe in light. So if you have that there and it goes away, that's it. Yeah, it can be somewhat scary, but it can also just be frustrating. But when you tie in the ability to have that light, have that safety, but it slowly goes away, unless the player keeps track of it, when done right, it's a really important, intense mechanic that can make a game way more intense depending on how you use it. But if you use it improperly, it can become more of a hassle. Like if your flashlight only lasts maybe 10 minutes in game and you get a battery maybe every 20, it could be more of a pain in the ass that you have to keep track of that to the point because you already have to hope that you find the batteries on top of being able to use them. Because the whole point of having them is that you want to be able to use them. You want your characters to have them, to be able to use them. And on harder difficulties, of course, this doesn't always fit because you want them to have to be smart with how they use their tools on the hardest difficulties. But I'm just saying that the idea of having the flashlight or the camera you see through if you're thinking of Outlast and the batteries are going down and you're seeing them go down and there's a slight reminder constantly of, okay, so this is bad. As long as you also don't want to make it to where if the player runs out of that light, they can't complete anything. It needs to be a bonus, a benefit to have it, and something that makes the feel secure. But it's not completely impossible to beat the area without it. So keep in mind that light can be a very important tool, like when you turn on the light and the light bulb just shatters. That's an interaction the player took part in, and all of a sudden it scared them. Even if you activate it and then it goes on, brightens up, and then breaks, that can be something that the player has interacted with now, and it startles themselves. And then the idea of jump scares. So the issue with jump scares is they're powerful tools when done right, but when used improperly, you could build up suspense and then get jump scared, and you lose that build up that you've got. So if you're trying to build up and you jump scare them and you're hoping that it keeps building up, there's a good chance that when they got jump scared, it cut off their ability to be scared again right very soon. Or if they are, it's not as memorable as a jump scare. It's more of a, okay. And then maybe they're going through and there's 2 or 3 more things they're going for. As you see, it'll go up and then it'll just kind of drop. Their suspense is now dropped. They've had the ability to release some of that stress, that anxiety that they're building up, the excitement. And once it's gone, it can't just be there for the next moment that happens. You have to have something that rebuilds it. And you can't just force it because every player is different. So keeping track of your gameplay, your lighting together is extremely important, as those two plus the psychology of your player tied with everything else we've talked about is what really makes a horror game special and unique. The idea that you can hop in and willingly get startled, which requires intricate and carefully placed moments in your project in order to pull off properly. So yeah, I know I talked a bit in this video, but I hope you all found this information rather helpful, as it's important things to know when you're making a horror game. And I genuinely love playing a good horror game. There's a lot of them that just aren't great, and there's a lot of them that these days just aren't as good as they could be. And it's kind of sad to see. So I'm hoping that talking about it will really excite people and get their minds working and their ideas in track, so that way they can get their projects done and really just take them to the next level. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed the video. I hope you all liked this format. I know I've done a few of them like this, but I'm trying to do a couple more. It takes a bit more effort editing, but if it works, please let me know in the comments below. If you liked it and you want to see more videos like this, please consider subscribing. And other than that, I hope you all have a good night, and I hope you all learned something.